It wasn't just lightning that flashed atop Mount Sinai. Something far greater descended that day. In our familiar retellings of the Exodus, Sinai is where Moses receives the 10 Commandments, stone tablets, laws for a nation, a covenant sealed in fire and thunder. But what if that wasn't all he received? What if, high above the trembling ground, in a realm between time and eternity, an angelic being opened a scroll and began dictating the entire history of humanity, not just from Egypt forward, but from the very moment of creation to the very end of days? This is exactly what the Book of Jubilees claims. A book many have never heard of. A book deliberately forgotten. A book that opens with an event so cosmic, so staggering in implication that it threatens to reframe how we understand not only the Bible, but all of time itself. In the first lines of Jubilees, we do not see Moses speaking to Israel. We see him standing in awe as a divine messenger reveals to him the account of the division of days, the true calendar of heaven, the cycles that govern the rise and fall of generations. This is no myth. This is no symbolic poetry. The angel is precise. He names years, months, and jubilees. He unfolds history as a pre-written manuscript, fixed and orderly, as if time were not a flowing river, but a scroll already written, waiting only to be read. Think about that. History, dictated from beginning to end by a heavenly being, and not just to anyone but to Moses, the prophet who spoke with God face to face. This revelation didn't come from Moses' imagination or memory. It wasn't a collection of oral traditions passed down through tribes. According to Jubilees, what Moses received on the mountain was not just law, but design. A design for time itself, a holy chronology dictated by an angel, rooted in the very will of God. Why have we never heard of this? Why is this book absent from our Bibles, marginalized by theologians, dismissed as apocryphal or even dangerous? Because if what it claims is true, then everything we know about biblical history, about human history, is incomplete. Sinai, then, was not merely the mountain of commandments, it was the gateway of memory, a cosmic archive, a divine unveiling of every jubilee, every generation, every covenant ever made. And the one who bore witness to it was not a philosopher or a historian, but an angel sent from the throne of God. From the beginning. This book does not ask politely for your attention. It demands it. It claims to reveal secrets long buried beneath centuries of tradition. It dares to suggest that the true structure of history has been hidden on purpose. It insists that if we are to understand God's plan, we must understand His calendar, not the calendar of Rome, not the calendar of commerce, but the sacred rhythm established at creation: 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 years, 7 sevens, a jubilee of time. This is the story of a forgotten book dictated by a divine scribe, a book that reveals not just what happened, but when it happened, why it happened, and what is coming next. Before we move forward, we must ask, if this book truly came from an angel on Sinai, why was it hidden, and what did they not want us to see? Some books fade into obscurity because time forgets them. Others are made to disappear. The Book of Jubilees belongs to the second category. Once held in high regard by ancient Jewish communities, once treasured among early Christians in Ethiopia and Qumran, it has been systematically erased from Western religious memory. Not because it lacked value, not because it failed the test of truth, but because its content was too precise, too disruptive, too uncontrollable for the frameworks later built by religious institutions. You see, Jubilees doesn't just retell the stories we already know from Genesis and Exodus. It corrects them, it reorders time, it redefines characters, it fills in blanks we didn't even know were there. And above all, it introduces a divine time code that no other book dares to claim: the division of all history into Jubilees. Every 49 years, according to this book, marks a closing and an opening, a sacred checkpoint where the affairs of humanity intersect with the decrees of heaven. Creation, the flood, the covenant with Abraham, the exodus from Egypt, all of it happened at appointed Jubilees, not by accident, not as a reaction, but by divine orchestration. That is a radical claim. It implies that we are not just living in time, we are living inside a sacred design, one that has patterns, one that has rules, one that has a climax. And this book, it's not merely a historical account. It's a map, a calendar, a cosmic schedule for prophecy. So what happens when a book like this is removed from public access? We lose the blueprint, we lose the rhythm, we lose the context of covenant, and perhaps we lose the ability to see where we really are in the story of redemption. Jubilees begins with a scene so overlooked, yet so explosive in implication. Moses, alone on Sinai, is given not just commandments, but a guided tour through the ages, a divine record, a manuscript from the heavenly library. The angel doesn't say, "Here's what happened as best as we remember." He says, "Write everything exactly as I say, so that the generations to come will not forget." That line, "so they will not forget," is haunting, because it means someone knew we would. It means that from the very beginning, this revelation was meant to anchor us to something eternal, a memory not based on myth, but on math, not on tradition, but on timing, not on man's history, but on God's record. But now, here we are, centuries later, with Jubilees labeled extra-biblical, relegated to the margins of Apocrypha, while its sacred time code lies buried beneath layers of Greco-Roman calendars and theological shortcuts. What was meant to guard our memory has become a forgotten whisper. What was once a blazing light atop Sinai has become a shadow in a scholar's footnote. But not anymore, because this is where the journey begins. We're not just reading a book. We're unlocking a vault. We're recovering the scaffolding of history that has been hidden not by chance, but by design. And what we'll uncover next will change the way you read Genesis forever. He has no name in the opening of Jubilees, no wings described, no trumpet blown. Yet his presence is unmistakable, towering, commanding, eternal. This is not a minor messenger sent with a simple word. This is a heavenly archivist, dispatched not merely to speak, but to unveil, to disclose, to recite the records of creation as they are stored in the courts of heaven. It is he who speaks to Moses on Sinai. It is he who carries the divine timeline not in metaphor, not in allegory, but in exact numbers. This is a being whose job is to guard time itself. And that changes everything. Because if heaven has a historian, then that means history is not accidental. If there are archives in the invisible realm kept by watchers, kept by angels, then every covenant, every generation, every act of rebellion or obedience has been documented. The angel speaks not like a preacher, but like a scribe of glory. His voice isn't fire and brimstone, it's detail. Write down the division of days, he commands. Write the years, the weeks, the jubilees. Record every law, every festival, every appointed time, so that Israel may not forget who they are. And Moses writes, not from memory, not from imagination, but from dictation. This challenges everything we think we know about biblical authorship. We often imagine the biblical writers as inspired poets, reflecting on God's acts and interpreting them for their people. But Jubilees presents a different picture, one that is far more unsettling and far more awe-inspiring the prophet as transcriber of heavenly data. And who is this angel? Some ancient Jewish traditions whisper a name, Metatron, the heavenly scribe, the voice of God, the one who speaks for the Most High when thunder cannot. Others suggest Uriel, the light of God, who brings understanding and order. But the text itself is silent, deliberately, perhaps because it is not the angel's identity that matters most, but the weight of his task. This being is a guardian of the eternal record, a being trusted with the divine schedule, a witness to Eden, to the flood, to the call of Abraham, to the giving of the law. He has seen it all, and now he is pouring it into Moses, like wine into a vessel made of dust and fire. And what Moses receives is not just sacred, it is cosmic. It is the timeline of heaven made visible on earth. So the real question is not, who is this angel? The real question is, if an angel handed down the divine calendar to Moses, why did we ever stop using it? Because buried in the quiet presence of this nameless scribe is a thunderous claim: time belongs to God, and he has kept a record of everything. Mountains are where God speaks, from the burning bush on Horeb to the still whisper on Carmel, from the transfiguration of Christ to the last trumpet of Revelation. Mountains are not just geography, they are thresholds. But Mount Sinai is something else entirely. It is not just a threshold, it is a vault. When we think of Sinai, we think of thunder, fire, smoke, a holy fear, commandments carved in stone, a nation trembling below, and Moses alone, ascending into the cloud, entering a realm beyond time. But the Book of Jubilees peels back the curtain further. Sinai, in its account, is not just where the law was given, it is where history itself was revealed in structured, recorded, unbreakable precision. The mountain becomes a meeting place between the eternal and the temporal. And the first conversation recorded in Jubilees is not a command, but a reconstruction. The angel says, "Come, I will show you everything that has happened, and I will show you what is yet to come." That changes the purpose of Sinai entirely. It is not merely about setting boundaries for a nation, it is about installing memory. Memory that is divine in origin. Memory that must not be lost. Moses, standing amid fire and cloud, is being handed the divine record not only of creation and the patriarchs, but of festivals, appointed times, righteous lineages, and the invisible logic of covenantal time. This is what the angel is tasked to impart, and Sinai becomes the archive through which it flows. And yet, somehow, in our modern faith experience, This part of the story is missing. The Sinai of Exodus gives us law. The Sinai of Jubilees gives us design. One is about behavior. The other is about structure. One says, do this, don't do that. The other says, this is how the story is built. Can you imagine Moses walking down that mountain not only with tablets of law in his hands, but with the heavenly record etched into his spirit, a map of time, a memory from before the world began, a pattern for living that aligns human time with divine order? And that pattern begins with something the modern world has almost entirely forgotten: the Jubilee cycle. Every 7th year, a release. Every 7 sevens, a reset. A world built on rhythm, not random motion. So what happened? Why did this aspect of Sinai vanish from our theology? How did we reduce a holy mountain to a list of do's and don'ts, and forget the deeper gift, a sacred alignment between heaven and earth? The answer, like the mountain itself, is shrouded in cloud. But one thing is clear. Jubilees wants us to remember what was lost. Not just the commandments, but the structure of time. Because Sinai was not only the birthplace of Israel's law, it was the moment when heaven opened its library and gave humanity back its original story. Time, as we know it, moves in a straight line. Seconds become minutes. Days become years. History is written from left to right, birth to death, beginning to end. It is linear, mechanical, cold, but not in heaven. In the Book of Jubilees, time doesn't flow like a river. It breathes, it pulses, it moves in holy cycles, like the rising and setting of the sun, like the beating of a heart. And the name for this divine rhythm is Jubilee. A Jubilee is more than just a 50th anniversary. It's a sacred measurement of time rooted in the design of creation itself. 7 years of 749 years total, followed by a year of release, a divine reset. But in Jubilees, this cycle isn't just for economics or land ownership. It is the very structure of sacred history, from Adam to Noah, from Abraham to Moses. Every generation, every event, every covenant unfolds precisely on the grid of Jubilees. Time is not accidental. It is calculated, holy, ordered. The angel on Sinai doesn't just give Moses a list of past events. He gives him a chronology, a calendar from the throne of God. He says, in effect, this happened in the 2nd week of the 4th Jubilee of the first creation period. Not a long time ago, not around this era, but exactly with divine timestamps. And if that doesn't shake you, consider what it means. It means the flood didn't just happen, it happened on schedule. It means the birth of Isaac, the call of Abraham, the plagues of Egypt, every one of them marked in the heavenly ledger. History, then, isn't chaos, it's choreography. And the Jubilee cycle is the invisible music playing beneath the movement of kings, prophets, nations, and wars. This is the time code of God, a divine architecture of sevens, 7 days, 7 weeks, 7 years, 7 times 7 years. It all began in Genesis, 6 days of creation, 1 day of rest. But in Jubilees, that pattern extends across history like rings in a tree, like ripples in a still pond. And that rhythm is meant to govern not just when things happen, but how they happen. Rest, return, release, recalibration. Every Jubilee was designed to be a sacred checkpoint, a moment when heaven and earth align. when debts are forgiven, when slaves go free, when land returns to its rightful owners. In short, it was the time when creation went back to the Creator. But we've abandoned that cycle. We've overwritten the calendar with Roman months, commercial quarters, and cultural holidays. We no longer recognize the sacred pulses that once synchronized heaven and earth. And in doing so, we've lost something priceless. Because if you don't know the rhythm of the composer, you'll never understand the music of the story. So what does this mean for us? It means we've been reading the Bible without the calendar it was written on. It means prophecy has been misaligned. Timing has been misread. The spiritual logic behind key events has gone unseen because we've been operating on a system God never designed. And now, for the first time in generations, Jubilees invites us to see it again, to trace the heartbeat of sacred time, to discover that time doesn't just pass, it prophesies. We were taught to think of history as a chain, one event linked to the next, driven by cause and effect, accidents and reactions. This nation rose because that one fell. This war broke out because of that treaty. This revival happened because of that persecution. But the Book of Jubilees whispers a deeper truth. None of it was random. According to the heavenly timeline given to Moses, history doesn't meander, it obeys. It follows a pattern, a blueprint, a design encoded in Jubilees. We're not dealing with a sequence of events. We're looking at a structured architecture of divine intention. In this design, every seventh unit of time is sacred. 7 days Sabbath, 7 weeks Pentecost, 7 years Shemitah, 7 times 7 years Jubilee. And Jubilees goes even further. Entire generations, entire covenants, entire eras are laid out according to this holy rhythm. The text doesn't say a long time ago. It says, in the 3rd week of the 22nd Jubilee, this happened. That level of precision only exists in plans, not in memories. We're not just reading stories. We're reading a calendar of redemption. Take Abraham, for example. Jubilees doesn't just say that God called him. It pinpoints exactly when, in the 6th year of the 4th week of the 44th Jubilee. Not only does this date Abraham's calling, it places it in the middle of a divine cycle, a Jubilee rhythm, where destinies align with sacred seasons. And what about the flood? It wasn't just a judgment, it was a reset. And resets always come on schedule. The angelic narrator of Jubilees shows Moses how God never acts arbitrarily. His judgments, his covenants, his revelations, they all arrive at precise, predetermined times, like a clock chime echoing through eternity. Why does this matter? Because it means we're not drifting in a sea of chaos. We are sailing on the current of a divine rhythm. And if God operated this way in the past, He's still operating this way now. But here's the tragedy: we've forgotten the pattern. We've rewritten the schedule. We've replaced the Creator's calendar with calendars of emperors, popes, banks, and empires. We track fiscal quarters. We celebrate man-made holidays. We ignore the appointed times written before the world began. And in doing so, we've lost alignment. When we lost the Jubilee framework, we didn't just lose historical clarity, we lost prophetic vision. We no longer know where we are in God's timeline. We no longer recognize the signs. We read the Bible, but we've forgotten the rhythm it was built on. But Jubilees is the Rosetta Stone of sacred time. It's the missing lens, the divine matrix, the schematic behind the unfolding of redemption. It tells us this happened here, that happened there, and soon this will happen again. History is not a line. It's a spiral circling back through patterns, inviting us to return, to remember, to realign. And until we recover the pattern, we'll always be out of sync with the plan. We've been told that the Sabbath is a command, a religious day, a break, a rule for rest. But that's not how the Book of Jubilees describes it. To Jubilees, the Sabbath is not just an instruction, it's a cosmic constant, a divine cornerstone embedded in the very act of creation. Before there were nations, before there was Israel, before there was sin or sacrifice, there was Sabbath, and not just as a day of the week, but as a pillar of time, a rhythm that holds the entire universe together. Jubilees doesn't treat Sabbath as optional, it treats it as immovable. It claims that Sabbath was created in heaven before it was ever revealed on earth, that the angels themselves keep it, that the very order of creation was calibrated around it. It is the seventh day, not because man needed rest, but because God chose to build rest into the architecture of existence. Think about that. Before there was a temple, there was Sabbath. Before there was Torah, there was Sabbath. Before Moses walked Sinai, Sabbath was already sanctified by God Himself. This isn't just a day to stop working. It's a day to step into alignment with the rhythm of the Creator. The Sabbath in Jubilees is described as holy and blessed not just for man, but for all of creation. It is a sign between heaven and earth, a declaration that time itself is not neutral. Time is sacred, time is marked, and every seventh day, time remembers. This is why the angel in Jubilees warns Moses so strongly: if Israel forgets the Sabbath, they will lose the calendar. If they lose the calendar, they will lose the appointed times. And if they lose the appointed times, they will no longer know my will. This isn't about legalism. This is about losing the script. Because when we abandon the Sabbath, we don't just break a command, we break the rhythm of heaven. We fall out of sync. We lose sensitivity to the seasons of the Spirit. We forget how to count sacred time. We wander from our post in God's prophetic timetable. And that's exactly what has happened in modern life. Sabbath is optional. In many churches, it's spiritualized into metaphor. In the culture, it's erased entirely. But in the economy of God, the Sabbath is the heartbeat of creation. Every seventh day is not just rest, it's recalibration, a reminder of origin, a window into eternity. Because the seventh day is not a human invention, it is a reflection of the eternal rest that awaits those who walk with God. This is why Jubilees places such massive weight on it. Because if you lose the Sabbath, you lose the pattern. If you lose the pattern, you lose the calendar. If you lose the calendar, you lose the alignment with heaven. And once that happens, you won't even realize when prophecy unfolds right in front of you. The Sabbath is not a legal burden. It's a spiritual compass. It's not a Jewish thing. It's a cosmic thing. And if we are to return to the sacred rhythm of God, we must begin not by jumping ahead into future prophecy, but by going back to the very first pause in time, back to when God stopped creating and started dwelling. We've heard it so many times, we never question it. Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible. And so we imagine a solitary prophet, perhaps sitting under a desert tree or inside a tent, pen in hand, recalling ancient stories passed down by the elders. We assume Genesis was a collection of tribal memories, cleaned up and organized by Moses into a coherent account. But what if that's wrong? What if Moses didn't write Genesis from memory, but received it from the mouth of an angel? That is exactly what the Book of Jubilees claims. It opens with Moses on Mount Sinai not writing from within himself, but recording word for word what the angel tells him. The angel doesn't say, "Write what you know." He says, "Write what I tell you." This changes everything. If Jubilees is telling the truth, then the creation account, the flood, the genealogies, the covenant with Abraham, all of it was dictated to Moses by a heavenly being who had access to the divine archive. This wasn't oral tradition. This wasn't cultural memory. This was transcription from heaven. And the angel makes it clear these things were recorded long before Moses was born. The events of Genesis weren't passed down like legends. They were kept, watched, documented. The angel himself had seen them. That's why he can give exact years, names, dates, even the thoughts of men's hearts. Because this isn't history from below, it's history from above. And that's a threat to modern theology. Because if Genesis wasn't compiled by human memory but revealed by divine dictation, then our entire foundation shifts. The source of Scripture is not man's search for God, it's God's direct revelation to man. We're not dealing with sacred storytelling. We're dealing with celestial journalism. This also means Moses wasn't the originator of the Torah. He was the recorder of a timeline far more ancient than Israel itself. The idea is offensive to modern scholars, but it's consistent with what other scriptures suggest. In the book of Galatians, Paul says the law was ordained by angels, Galatians 3:19. In Hebrews 2:2, it says the message was spoken through angels. Acts 7:53 repeats the claim Israel received the law by the direction of angels. So why does it sound strange to us? Because we've grown too comfortable with a human-centered Bible. We prefer the idea that men piece together divine truth over time. That way, it can evolve, it can be edited, it can be debated. But if Moses was simply taking dictation from a divine being, then the Genesis account is not up for revision. It is not a product of cultural evolution. It is not a regional myth with universal themes. It is the record of heaven, revealed to a man who climbed a mountain to hear it. This is why Jubilees matters, because it refuses to let us treat Genesis as human literature. It forces us to confront the possibility that what we call history is actually revelation, and that Moses didn't write the beginning of the story. He received it, word by word, cycle by cycle, jubilee by jubilee. If history follows a sacred rhythm, if jubilees are more than relics of the past, then we have to ask the most unsettling question yet: is the pattern still unfolding? The Book of Jubilees doesn't describe a system that once mattered. It describes a system that still governs time, a cosmic metronome ticking in the background of human events. And if that's true, then our world, our wars, our pandemics, our global resets may not be random at all. They may be timed. Let's look at just a few examples. In 1917, during World War I, the Balfour Declaration was signed, paving the way for the return of the Jewish people to their ancient land. Exactly 50 years later, in 1967, Israel recaptured Jerusalem during the Six-Day War. Another Jubilee later, in 2017, Jerusalem was officially recognized by a major world power as Israel's capital for the first time since antiquity. Coincidence? Or is there something deeper pulsing beneath the timeline? What if God's clock never stopped? What if the Jubilees are not just theology, they're prophetic cycles? Still turning. The Jubilee system wasn't designed to be symbolic. It was designed to order time itself economically, spiritually, nationally. Every 50th year was meant to be a reset. Land returned to its original owners. Debts were forgiven. Slaves were set free. The land was given rest. The people were recalibrated. The structure of society realigned with the will of heaven. Now ask yourself, what have the last few years felt like? Has the world not been forced into resets? 2020 brought a pandemic that stopped the planet. 2021 to 2022 saw supply chains collapse. 2023 and 2024 escalated global tensions. And now we enter 2025, asking what comes next. Are we living in another prophetic jubilee? Have we crossed a threshold in sacred time? Jubilees tells us that certain years aren't just numbers, they're appointments. Moments when heaven leans in, moments when judgment or restoration descends. And those who know the calendar will not be surprised. But those who have forgotten it will call it chaos. This is why the book was given to Moses, not for his generation alone, but for those to come, for those who would one day look at the world unraveling and wonder, what time is it in heaven? Because time, in the eyes of God, is not about clocks and dates, it's about alignment. And if you want to understand what's happening now, you have to go back to the calendar that was buried, back to the book that held the blueprint, back to the angel who dictated the design. What if the most shocking thing about biblical history is that it's not really history, not the way we've been taught? We think of history as a record events that happened long ago, remembered and retold. A narrative unfolding over time, shaped by people and choices and consequences. But in the Book of Jubilees, history is not remembered. It is released. It does not unfold. It is unsealed. The angel on Mount Sinai doesn't offer Moses a series of stories. He offers him a schedule, a divine timetable, a cosmic itinerary written before the world began. And that changes everything, because if the timeline was written, then that means the events weren't spontaneous. They were set. The creation of the world timed, the fall of man timed, the calling of Abraham timed, the Exodus timed, the coming of the Messiah timed. Every act of God was not a reaction, it was a release, like a door opening on cue, like a trumpet sounding right on time. This is why the Book of Jubilees is so precise. It counts the weeks, it names the Jubilees, it tracks the appointed times with surgical accuracy, because it's not telling you what happened. It's telling you when heaven decided to reveal the next chapter, and the implications are staggering. If God has a calendar, then we are not living in random chaos. We are living in a preloaded timeline, a divine rhythm, a prophetic structure pulsing beneath politics, pandemics, empires, and awakenings. You are not floating in history. You are moving across a schedule, and that schedule leads somewhere. That's why the angel gave this revelation to Moses at the foot of fire, because he wasn't just leading a people out of slavery. He was reintroducing them to time itself, not Egyptian time, not pagan time, but God's time. A calendar written before the sun and moon, a calendar built into the bones of creation, a calendar that is still counting down today. We have been told that time is neutral, that it is mechanical, that it belongs to science. But in reality, time belongs to God. He owns it. He shapes it. He speaks through it. And if we want to understand what he is doing next, we have to return to the book that holds the blueprint, because history has never been a disconnected story. It has always been a structured countdown, and the clock is still ticking. The angel wasn't just a messenger. He was a guardian, a witness, a recorder of time. And what he told Moses wasn't just a story of beginnings. It was a warning for the end, over and over. The angel repeats the same refrain: write this down so they will not forget. Record it exactly for future generations. They will stray. They will corrupt the appointed times. They will abandon the covenant. This is not just narration. This is a prophecy. The angel saw it coming, the drift, the dilution, the great forgetting. He foresaw a generation that would keep religious tradition but lose the divine calendar. A people who would build temples but forget the Jubilee, who would recite the scriptures but sever them from their timeline. And his voice echoes through the mountain winds with a sobering charge. If they lose the calendar, they will lose me. This is not about dates on a page. It's about alignment with the heart of God. When we forget the structure of time, we don't just lose accuracy, we lose intimacy. We stop walking with God and start walking beside him, out of rhythm, out of sync. And this is exactly what has happened. Today, the festivals have been replaced, the Sabbaths ignored, the Jubilees erased, the covenant rhythms buried under centuries of confusion, translation, and compromise. And the angel's warning becomes hauntingly real. We thought we could modernize sacred time. We thought we could streamline faith without the calendar. We thought the patterns didn't matter anymore. But the consequences have already begun to show. Disorientation, prophetic blindness, a church that doesn't know what time it is, because if you lose the cycle, you lose your place. If you lose your place, you lose your identity. And if you lose your identity, you won't recognize the voice of the one calling you home. The angel gave this revelation to protect us from exactly this. He wasn't giving Moses an academic record. He was handing him a lifeline, a prophetic scaffolding to preserve the people of God across centuries of exile, empire, and deception. And that scaffolding was built on one thing: time, as God designed it. We weren't just meant to remember stories. We were meant to live inside the pattern, to keep the Sabbaths, to mark the Jubilees, to walk according to the appointed times, not because they are ritualistic, but because they are relational. They are how heaven meets earth, how the Creator walks with his creation. The angel knew we would forget. And now you know why this book was buried. Not because it was false, but because it was dangerously true. If what you've just heard is even partially true, then something is very wrong with the story we've inherited. We say we believe the Bible, we quote Genesis, we study the Exodus, we cling to the promises made to Abraham, to Noah, to Moses. But do we know when those promises were made? Do we understand the calendar God was working from? Because without that, we're reading the script without the schedule. The Book of Jubilees is not some fringe relic. It's not a forgotten myth. It is the missing key to understanding the time-bound structure of the Bible we already claim to believe. You can't fully understand Genesis if you don't see it through the lens of Jubilees. You can't understand the Sabbath if you don't grasp how it functions within the cycles of heaven. You can't read the Bible as prophecy if you've thrown out the calendar it was written on. We say we love the Word of God, but what if the Word came with a pattern and we ignored it? What if the commandments were given within a rhythm and we severed it? What if Moses was entrusted with the blueprint not just for Israel, but for every generation that would forget? And what if this is that generation, the one that forgot, the one that wandered from the appointed times, the one that calls prophecy symbolic and sacred time legalism? But now the blueprint is resurfacing. Now the calendar is reappearing. Now the angel's voice, once buried beneath councils and creeds, is being heard again, and you are hearing it right now. You are not here by accident. You didn't find this by chance. This is not entertainment. It's invitation. Because if you believe in the scriptures, you must wrestle with what's been left out. And if you believe God is a God of order, you must ask, why was the order removed? You've been handed back a piece of the original design, not a new doctrine, not a conspiracy, but a calendar, a sacred timeline that once guided the people of God, and now it's calling you back, back to the rhythm, back to the structure, back to the voice that still speaks from Sinai. Ask yourself this: when did we forget? When did we stop asking what time it is in heaven? When did the Sabbath become optional? When did the Jubilees disappear from our calendars? When did we stop measuring sacred events by God's rhythm and start trusting man's timeline instead? It didn't happen all at once. No trumpet sounded. No prophet wept in the streets. It was quiet, gradual, imperceptible. A lost scroll here, a silenced book there. A council that redefined canon. A culture that redefined truth. And little by little, generation by generation, we forgot. We forgot that creation was not just a moment, it was a structure. We forgot that time itself was designed, sanctified, and gifted as a tool of remembrance. We forgot that Moses didn't just come down from Sinai with rules. He came down with a record, a timeline, a calendar, a divine memory. And now, most of us live as if that memory never existed. We live on borrowed calendars. We plan our lives around man-made milestones. We follow holidays with no covenant meaning. We read Genesis, but forget the design behind it. We talk about prophecy, but can't locate ourselves on the map. We say we're waiting for Jesus to return, but don't know where we are in the countdown, because the blueprint was buried, and we inherited a faith with its rhythm stripped out. And that should break our hearts, because it means we've been walking through the holy story of God, without knowing the timing of our own part in it. But now, the silence is ending. The pattern is resurfacing. And the Spirit of God is awakening a generation not just to believe again, but to remember. To remember that time is not secular, it is sacred. To remember that prophecy is not vague, it is scheduled. To remember that your life is not floating in randomness, but tethered to a divine rhythm that has never stopped beating. The angel saw this moment coming, that in the final generations, someone would open the book again, someone would remember, and maybe that someone is you.